The retreat had become routine. Orders came, lines shifted, ground was abandoned, again, and again, and again. By mid-December 1939, Finnish soldiers along the Eastern Front no longer asked if they would fall back, only when. Then one man arrived, and he asked a question that changed everything. What if we stop? This is the story of Paavo Talvela, and the moment when retreat ended, risk replaced caution, and the Winter War took a decisive turn. By the time Talvela took command in eastern Finland, the situation was grim. Soviet forces were advancing steadily through forest roads and frozen lake systems. Finnish units, outnumbered and undersupplied, had adopted a strategy of elastic defense. Delay, withdraw, survive. It was logical, it was disciplined, and it was slowly bleeding Finland dry. Each withdrawal shortened the front, but also shortened hope. Talvela saw what others were beginning to fear. If retreat became habit, collapse would follow. Paavo Talvela was not an obvious savior. He was not young. He was not charismatic in the conventional sense. And he did not command overwhelming forces. What he possessed instead was something rarer: clarity. Talvela understood the terrain, the psychology of his soldiers, and, most importantly, the weaknesses of his enemy. And he understood something else. The Red Army did not expect resistance anymore. When Talvela assumed command near Talvijärvi, he inherited a defensive line under immense pressure. Soviet units believed Finnish forces were on the verge of collapse. Their intelligence reports confirmed it. Finnish withdrawals had reinforced the illusion. To Soviet commanders, this sector looked ready to break. Talvela saw opportunity. His assessment was brutally simple. Finnish troops were exhausted, but not beaten. Soviet troops were numerous, but overconfident, and the terrain favored the defender. If the defender chose to fight, Talvela concluded that continued retreat would guarantee defeat. But a sudden counterstroke, executed decisively, might shatter Soviet momentum. It was a gamble, and failure would be catastrophic. Talvela's decision ran against instinct, against doctrine, against caution, against everything a smaller army was supposed to do. But Talvela believed something more dangerous than Soviet artillery was creeping into the Finnish ranks: resignation. And resignation, once it spreads, cannot be stopped by orders. He gathered his commanders and issued a directive that stunned them. There would be no further retreat at Talvijärvi. The line would not bend. It would strike. The plan was audacious. Finnish forces would concentrate what little strength they had left. Units that had been scattered by months of defensive fighting would be reassembled. Ski troops would move through forests to attack Soviet flanks and rear positions. The goal was not to hold ground. It was to disrupt coherence. If Soviet units could be isolated, confused, and cut off, their numbers would become a liability instead of an advantage. The risk was enormous. If the attack failed, Finnish forces could be encircled and destroyed. There were no reserves waiting behind them, no second line to fall back to. Talvela knew this. He accepted it. What made the decision even more remarkable was timing. The attack would take place in deep winter. Temperatures plunged far below freezing. Weapons malfunctioned. Frostbite stalked both sides. Yet Talvela believed winter favored the bold. Finnish soldiers were accustomed to it. The Red Army was not. As preparations began, the mood among Finnish troops shifted. For weeks, they had been retreating, disciplined, professional, but always backward. Now, for the first time, they were being told to advance. Not blindly, but deliberately. Morale surged, not because victory was guaranteed, but because purpose had returned. On the Soviet side, no alarm was raised. Their intelligence interpreted Finnish movements as further withdrawal. Columns advanced confidently along narrow roads between frozen lakes, unaware that their flanks were being watched. Talvela's greatest advantage was invisibility. The forest concealed everything. When the attack came, it came suddenly. Finnish units struck from multiple directions. Ski troops appeared where Soviet commanders believed no enemy could reach. Supply lines were cut. Communications collapsed. Soviet forward units found themselves isolated, unsupported and confused. The advance halted, then fractured. Talvela had anticipated this moment. He ordered pressure maintained relentlessly. Finnish forces did not pause to consolidate ground. They struck, withdrew, and struck again, never allowing Soviet units to reorganize. What had been a confident Soviet push became a struggle to survive. The psychological impact was immediate. Soviet soldiers who believed the enemy was retreating now found themselves surrounded by invisible attackers. Tanks were immobilized. Infantry advanced without coordination. Orders contradicted one another. Fear spread faster than bullets. Within days, it was clear that something extraordinary was happening. The Red Army was not just being delayed, it was being defeated. Talvela's decision to stop falling back had achieved what months of defensive fighting had not. It had seized the initiative. An initiative, once lost, is difficult to recover. The battle at Talvajärvi would become the first clear Finnish victory of the Winter War. But its significance went far beyond the battlefield. It proved that Soviet forces could be beaten decisively. It proved that Finnish tactics were not merely defensive improvisations, but a viable way to fight a modern army. And it proved that leadership at the right moment could change the direction of history. The aftermath was electric. Finnish morale surged across the front. Soldiers who had doubted survival now believed in resistance. International observers took notice. The myth of Soviet invincibility cracked. Inside Soviet command, the reaction was shock and anger. Questions were asked. Blame was assigned. But beneath the surface, something else began. Re-evaluation. Talvela's counterattack forced the Red Army to confront uncomfortable truths about its doctrine, leadership, and adaptability. Lessons were learned, slowly, painfully. For Talvela himself, the victory was not an end. It was a moment seized at enormous risk, and one that could not be repeated everywhere. He understood that Talvajärvi was not a blueprint for total victory, but a reminder of what was possible. The long-term consequences of his decision were profound. The Winter War would continue, brutal and unforgiving. Finland would still be forced to concede territory, but Talvajärvi ensured something crucial. Finland would negotiate peace as a nation that had fought back, not one that had simply collapsed. Paavo Talvela's legacy is not found in conquest. It is found in interruption. He interrupted momentum. He interrupted despair. He interrupted history's assumption that small nations must always yield. The decision to stop falling back was not reckless. It was calculated, and it revealed a truth that echoes far beyond the Winter War. Sometimes, survival does not come from retreat. Sometimes, it comes from choosing the moment to stand. At Talvajärvi, that moment arrived, and one man recognized it. History followed.